All right, let's get into a story that's, well, it's a tough one. We're going to unpack what happens at the really uncomfortable intersection of a nuclear disaster, a mysterious spike in childhood cancer, and a fierce political battle over the truth.
So let's just start with this question, because it's a big one. After the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster, a massive health screening for children was launched. It was supposed to provide reassurance, peace of mind. Instead, it uncovered something that was deeply, deeply unsettling, and it lit a fire under a controversy that is still burning to this day.
The number itself is just staggering. We're talking about a population of just 380,000 young people. And out of that group, hundreds have been diagnosed with or are suspected of having thyroid cancer. It just raises this huge, unsettling question. What is going on in Fukushima?
Now, to be really clear, this is not a common illness. Pediatric thyroid cancer is incredibly rare. But, and this is the crucial part, it has a known historical link to radioactive iodine exposure. We saw this tragically confirmed after the Chernobyl disaster. So you can see why these numbers coming out of Fukushima immediately set off alarm bells all over the world.
So how did we even find all these cases in the first place? Well, it all started with a massive public health initiative, one that had a completely unexpected outcome. The government kicked off something called the Fukushima Health Management Survey. It was for all 380,000 young people who were under 18 when the disaster hit. And the stated goal, the official goal, was pretty simple, just to provide reassurance and ease people's worries. And look, the process they set up was incredibly thorough. Step 1, an ultrasound for everybody. Step 2, if they found any nodules or cysts over a certain size, those kids were sent for a more detailed secondary exam. And then step 3, if it still looked suspicious, they do a fine needle aspiration biopsy to actually check for cancer cells. But this very comprehensive screening, it soon started turning up results that, instead of calming fears, really just created a whole new level of concern. Okay, so you have this explosion in cases. How did officials and a university that was running the program explain it? Well, they landed on a pretty controversial theory, what's known as the screening effect. The official line from the Japanese government and Fukushima Medical University is that this is not a true increase in cancer caused by radiation. No. Instead, they say, it's all a screening effect. And this is really the core of their argument. They're saying that the high-tech, super-sensitive ultrasound machines are just finding tiny, dormant cancers that would have otherwise gone completely unnoticed and never caused any health problems in a person's lifetime. Basically, they think they're finding cancers that never needed to be found. But as the years went on and the screening program continued through more and more rounds of testing, data started to pop up that, well, it didn't fit so neatly into that overdiagnosis box. And right here, this is the central scientific conflict. The overdiagnosis theory, it predicts something called a harvesting effect. You find a huge batch of pre-existing cancers in that first big screening, and then the number should plummet, right? But they didn't. New cancers kept showing up at a really high rate in later rounds in kids who were totally cancer-free before. And on top of that, when independent researchers dug into the data, a very clear geographic pattern emerged. You can see it right here. Cancer rates were highest in the most radioactively contaminated areas, the evacuation zone. And then they got progressively lower as you moved to less contaminated regions. That, to an epidemiologist, looks a lot like a classic dose-response signal, which suggests a link between exposure and the outcome. So this is the point where the story really pivots away from just pure science and becomes a battle over the narrative. And it's a battle that critics say is heavily influenced by politics and, frankly, huge financial stakes, including the entire future of Japan's nuclear energy policy. And this timeline shows a really consistent pattern. You have independent scientific findings, like Dr. Tsuda's paper, getting published and grabbing international attention. Then you see an official response that's almost always a flat-out dismissal or they're just ignored. Now, at the center of this controversy, you find key figures like Fukushima's governor, Masao Uchibori. And you have to understand he's not just any politician. His entire career was as a bureaucrat in charge of nuclear power plant policy. He was the vice governor responsible for the disaster response in 2011. And here's where it gets really strange. There is a 1-month gap in his public record right after the meltdown. It's just a blank. This kind of secrecy is so unusual. It's led critics and journalists to speculate that there's a really deep political motivation to control the whole story of the disaster and that the governor is right at the heart of it.
So it goes beyond just individual figures. Critics point to what they see as a systemic pattern of secrecy, alleging that data has been deliberately controlled, maybe even altered to prop up the official story.
One of the most crucial discoveries was the existence of what are called shukegai, or off-count patients. These are kids who are diagnosed with thyroid cancer, but outside the official screening program's count. Maybe they use their regular health insurance for follow-up exams, and the effect was that they were basically hidden from the main statistic. By 2019, at least 47 of these off-count cases had been confirmed. And sources on the ground suggest the real number is probably much higher. What that means is that the official tally, which is already alarming, is a pretty significant undercount. It brings the total number of known cases to well over 400. So, critics are pointing to what looks like a multi-pronged strategy to control the science. They allege that key town-by-town data was withheld, making it impossible for others to analyze it. They say expert committee meetings were basically scripted in secret pre-meetings. And maybe most importantly, an official promise made way back in 2015 to release the full dataset for independent review, well, it's never happened. And this alleged pattern of control has led some observers to feel like the actual memory and impact of the disaster, the true scale of it, is being systematically downplayed, rewritten, maybe even erased. So, to wrap this all up, this is so much more than a simple medical debate. On one hand, you have hundreds of children with a rare cancer. You have the official explanation of overdiagnosis. On the other, you have a counter-argument based on radiation, backed by evidence of new cases and clear geographic patterns. And this whole thing is just wrapped in a fierce battle over data, transparency, and really the legacy of the disaster itself. And that just leaves us with this final, really unsettling question. When you have a situation this complex, with the health of children on one side and huge national policy decisions on the other, how is the truth actually determined? And who gets to decide what that truth is?